She was born beneath 2 moons in the Valley of Silver Rain, where vampires ruled the night and wolves ruled the land. Her name was Elowen Vale, a name once carried on the tongues of nobles, sung in the old halls before the wars burned everything down. Her father had been a vampire lord of the Eastern Coven, proud and ruthless. Her mother, a high-born wolf of the crescent pack, the kind who could summon a storm with her howl. Their love was forbidden, but they loved anyway, deeply, dangerously, beautifully. Elowen was the proof that love could cross bloodlines and still make something stronger. Half vampire, half wolf, an omega by birth order and by curse. She remembered her mother's stories, whispered when the nights were kind. Stories of how she had loved her father so fiercely that both their worlds had tried to erase them, and failed. Elowen grew up believing that kind of love was worth waiting for. The kind that didn't fear scars or fate. The kind that found you even in darkness. But the noble blood in her veins had long stopped mattering. The war ended. The covens won. The packs fell. Her parents were executed on the same dawn they called their love eternal. Elowen was spared. Not out of mercy, but out of use. They collared her before she could shift. Sold her before she could weep. To the pits of Crimson Hollow, where the mixed blood and the unwanted were bought, trained and made to fight, until their hearts forgot how to beat for anything but survival. Now she was called Red, not Elowen, the crowd's name for her, the color of her victories, the taste of her curse. A hybrid slave, owned by the Blood Court, fighting not for freedom but for the chance to live one more day. But deep down, under the roar of blood and steel, she still believed in love. Not the kind sung in noble halls, but the kind her mother had promised would come for her. Even in a pit full of monsters, the night was thick with smoke and hunger when Red stepped into the arena. The scent of wet iron filled the air, the torches hissed with greed. The sand beneath her boots was dark, with the blood of a dozen fallen alphas. Chains rattled on her wrists as she lifted her blade. The collar at her throat glowed faintly red, a reminder of who she belonged to. Around the ring, wolves and vampires filled the stands, shouting for violence, for her name, for a spectacle. Red gave them all of it. She was no longer the frightened child who had once dreamed of stars. The pit had burned that girl away, and left only a weapon behind. Her blade moved faster than thought, striking clean, controlled, beautiful in its brutality. She had become legend, the Omega who defeated every alpha warrior. But the more she won, the more the crowd turned from awe to fear. Her master saw it too, and fear, in the Blood Court, was never allowed to grow unchecked. Tonight, the house had promised a new challenger. One who would break the undefeated hybrid. The crowd waited like wolves before the hunt, chanting her name and her doom in the same breath. She raised her chin, eyes the color of pale ashened wine, and whispered to herself, "Let them come." The gate opened. The torches flickered as something, or someone, stepped out. At first she thought it was a trick of the smoke, or a cruel jest, but no. The scent was wrong. The air shifted. Human. He walked down the ramp, without armor, without claws, without the feral shimmer of any known bloodline. Just a man in tattered clothes, his eyes calm and unafraid. He looked nothing like a warrior. His hands were bare, his pulse steady. And yet, when his gaze met hers, something ancient stirred in her chest. Something her wolf blood recognized, and her vampire heart remembered. It wasn't lust, it wasn't hunger, it was something older, like the whisper of her mother's voice saying, "Love will find you, even here." The pitmaster laughed, loud and cruel. "A human?" he jeered. "Perhaps the gods are tired of her victories." The crowd roared, ready for slaughter. Red didn't flinch. Humans didn't belong in their world. They broke too easily. They bled too fast. But as the man stepped closer, his shadow steady and sure beneath the torchlight, Red felt something she hadn't felt in years. Her heart, her cursed, half-blood heart, stumbled. He met her eyes and spoke softly, a voice meant for her alone. "I mean no harm." Her fingers tightened on the blade. "No one comes into the pit without it." The drum began to beat. The crowd screamed for blood. She moved first, because that was all she knew how to do. Her blade flashed silver and death. The human didn't run. He didn't beg. He lifted his hand, bare, steady, mortal, and caught her strike mid-swing. For one impossible heartbeat, time froze. Then a crack split the air. Her blade, her unbreakable blade shattered in his grasp. The pit went silent. The weapon that had carried her through every battle lay in pieces at her feet, glittering like broken stars in the sand. Red stared at him, breathless. His palm bled, but he didn't flinch. He looked at her not with arrogance but with something else entirely. Recognition. Understanding. A pull written in blood and destiny. In that instant, she knew. The crowd, the masters, the chains, all of it vanished. Because this man, this impossible human, wasn't just her challenger. He was the one her mother had whispered about. The one written into her bones before she ever drew breath. Her fated mate. Her undoing. Her salvation. And when he spoke again, his voice was gentle but unyielding. "You don't need that blade," he said. "You were born for more than this." She was born beneath 2 moons in the Valley of Silver Rain. Her father was a vampire lord from the Eastern Coven, sharp, proud, unbending. Her mother was a high-born wolf of the Crescent-pack, fierce, gentle, stubborn as mountain roots. Their love broke old laws but held anyway. From that love came Elowen Vale, half vampire, half wolf, an omega by birth, order, and decree. Noble by blood. None of it mattered after the war. The covens won. The packs fell. Her parents were executed together at first light. Elowen was spared, not from mercy, but for use. They collared her before she could shift. They sold her before she could mourn. The Blood Court branded her and sent her to the fighting pits of Crimson Hollow, where mixed blood and unwanted bodies were trained, named, and broken for coin. In the pits they stopped calling her Elowen. They called her Red, for the color the sand kept when she was done. She learned to make hunger into a tool, and pain into focus. She learned to move faster than fear. She learned what people paid for: quick fights, beautiful falls, and the quiet at the end when a body realizes it lost. She made alphas kneel. She made them beg. The house took the coin and tightened her collar. Still, she kept one secret. Under the iron, under the orders, under the noise, she held the story her mother had promised her as a child. True love finds its way, even through chains. Not the kind sung in noble halls. The kind that shows up when the world is cruel, and chooses you anyway. The night it began, the rain smelled like iron and old cedar. Red stood in the clay bowl of the pit, with a borrowed blade balanced across her palms. Her collar clicked when she dipped her head. The iron plate on it showed the sigil of the house that owned the pit, and everyone who bled in it. Torches hissed. Wolves and vampires filled the stands. She could taste pack musk in the smoke, and the copper sweet of coven blood in the velvet boxes above. The first alpha dropped into the sand all swagger and teeth. He announced the rules like he owned them. No claws, no fangs, no shifting, no blood on purpose. Only on accident. Clean so the sand stayed marketable. He came fast and confident. She gave him a clean fall and the mercy of an unbroken jaw. The second alpha was clever and cruel. He tried to talk while they circled, using his voice like a leash. "You could have been one of us." She broke his bite on her elbow and set his shoulder out of joint, then stepped away. Coin changed hands above them. "Keep the third one beautiful." Her handler's whisper buzzed against the iron ring at her ear. "Beauty sells." The third alpha bowed to her with a young man's pride. He fought bright and doomed. She let him graze her twice so he could tell himself a better story later, then put him down with a wrist catch he would remember every winter when the cold settled into his bones. The crowd wanted blood now. The coven box rattled with rings on wood. House stewards passed subtle signals. Someone in the bleachers said, "Bring her the king." There was no king, only rich men who thought the pit gave crowns. A heavy brute came next, necklace strung with teeth that had been braver in other mouths. She took his timing, his nose, and the mood of the coven box while she was at it. He fell. The torches jumped, the bleachers groaned. "Enough," her handler said into her skull, but the house had already decided that enough was a poor man's word. A new gate creaked, the torches leaned higher, the whole place held its breath. He wasn't a wolf, he wasn't coven, he wasn't anything the pit had bought before. He walked down the ramp like gravity was a suggestion. A coat that had known rain, boots that had known roads, hands that had known work. His face wasn't pretty, in the court sense. but it was the kind of face you trusted to fix a door that stuck or calm a skittish horse. Human, her body said, surprised and dismissive at once. No pack echo. No altar salt. Just skin, iron, and a steady heartbeat. A laugh started and spread, the kind that turned people into masks. Humans didn't come into the pit. Humans watched from doorways, or stayed home, and prayed to be left alone by old wars. The stewards didn't laugh. They watched the way hawks watch, and then rethink what they're hunting. He didn't bow. He stopped behind the painted line and lifted empty hands. Then he looked at her, not at the coven box, not at the stewards, and something inside her went still. She didn't believe in fate. Fate was what powerful people called the edges of maps they'd redrawn to starve others. But when his eyes found hers, the world changed temperature. Something older than pack, older than altar, older than the first price set on a throat, moved along her spine like thunder. A novelty, a steward announced, eager to turn fear back into coin. Pit favorite blade against gentler blood. If the man runs, let him. If he stands, bless him. If he dies. He stopped because the human looked up at him and made the words wither. Up close she saw the small true things, an old scar across a knuckle, a nick at the ear where someone's bad aim had shaved youth, a lattice of fine silvery burns on his palm as if he had once touched what shouldn't be touched. He smelled like rain that keeps its promises. You don't have to. He started, quiet so the crowd leaned in to steal it. We do this, she said. Mercy that entered the pit left on a stretcher. He nodded. Respect, not surrender. He stood easy, jaw loose, shoulders free, hands open. Most fighters clenched some part of themselves. Ease sat on him like armor. The drum stretched one heartbeat into a road. She moved. First pass warning. Second test. Third a beautiful threat. No touch. No flinch. On the fourth she gave him the cut that made alphas remember their grandmothers. Advice. He lifted his bare hand. Steel met palm, and stuttered. His fingers closed on the edge, like it had been made as a handle for him alone. The blade cracked with a clean, cold chime. Fragments flashed and fell like small, ashamed stars. Silence had weight. He kept his palm on the broken throat of her past, and met her eyes without triumph or apology, only knowing. In her chest, something split open like truth arriving. The bond hit, older than heat, older than packnet or altar thread. Not a word. A scent like home threaded with storm. Knees softened, she kept them steady. Her handler's ring shrieked. Finish it, finish him, finish the night, pay the debt. Stewards leaned in. Rings stilled. Alphas in cheap seats felt the old envy that rises when something stronger than rules walks in wearing boots. The human lifted his hand from the edge. Torchlight caught the scars on his palm. He flexed once, cataloguing pain from some other life, and dropped his hands again, open. You should run, she told him, because honesty still mattered in a ruined place. I won't, he said. He didn't say can't, he said won't. Choice, not cage. It was the first kind thing anyone had ever given her here. Wages rolled over them. She stepped forward. He didn't back up. She worked the broken blade like a short sword, testing angle and measure. He moved with respect. She didn't know what respect looked like until it stood in front of her and refused to turn her into a weapon for other men's stories. He didn't strike. He didn't fold. She drove him because prayer was a habit. He weathered her because faith was his. Some cheered. Some booed. The house counted unearned coins drifting away like embers. Crossbows appeared along the rail. The coven box tilted toward uglier interests. The pit had decided novelty was now a problem. Problems here had ritual answers. A far gate ground open. The house's beast, half-shifted, starved of speech, lurched into the sand. They kept him broken so he would follow simple rules. Kill what the pit points to. His whine had once been a word. Relief rolled through the seats. People loved the story they expected. The human's attention slid to the beast and back to her, with a question that needed no voice. Not can you. May I? Pack law had an old permission. The moment you accept being kept alive by another's strength. She had never said yes to anything the house didn't own. Her body answered for her. She stepped half a pace to his left, and lowered her blade. He didn't smile. He settled, like someone finally allowed to carry a weight he had wanted for years. The beast hit them the way hired pain does. Practiced, hungry, aimed. She went high, he went low. For a few stunned beats the pit saw something it had never bought and could not price. Two bodies learning each other in the open. He didn't smash, he found joints and breaths. He placed hands, he waited, he shifted. She cut where he gave her space, not to kill, but to correct. Together they turned the beast, the tide, the story. Even the coven box forgot to drink. When the beast sagged, blind with fury and confusion, the human laid his palm over its chest like a blessing. Air thinned. Elwyn thought of her blade's voice in his hand. She thought of the old scar map on his palm. Only later would she understand that he had learned to hold what broke him until it broke differently. The beast sank. He guided it to the sand as gently as lowering a heavy door. Silence again. Even the rain outside paused. The house found its anger. Signals flashed, crossbows leveled. Elwyn saw the moment before Bowstring spoke, and knew the pit would punish her for being loved by the wrong thing. She could have run. Wolfblood knows how to live another day. Covenblood knows how to dissolve into shadow. She did neither. It wasn't a cage. It was a door. She stepped in front of him. His breath warmed the back of her neck. It steadied her more than any oath. He didn't say, "My turn," or "Trust me." He lifted his scarred hand. The nearest bolt screamed as if it regretted being metal. It struck his palm and came apart, fletching into ash, shaft into limp rope, head soft as rain. She didn't understand it. She would later. In the moment, she understood this. The night had decided on a different ending, because one man stood and refused to move. The bleachers rippled, like a shoal. The coven box remembered fear from better centuries. Rain outside broke open, loud enough to wash the night. Her handler's ring buzzed itself to death and went quiet. For the first time since the collar she let her hands be empty. He leaned close. His voice built a harbor inside her. "You are not theirs. Not your victories. Not your collar. Not their entertainment." Something in her life clicked to a new track. The house would not relent. Men who owned pits learned early that relenting got them killed by the kind of mercy that never stops. This night would set the angle of 100 future nights. She took his hand, terror and relief both in the grip, and ran not away but through. Bolts hit his palm and unmade into weather. She put a steward into a chair with the flat of her hand, and the truth that power is borrowed. The crowd split. Fear to the doors, faith to the edges to watch history try to change. The coven box dissolved into smoke that smelled like old money. Alphas scrambled like they had just remembered they were animals. At the gate, iron forgot itself when his hand asked it kindly to become rain. Night hit her face. The city smelled like wet bread and horse and secrets. They ran until the pit's noise was past, then kept running because sometimes the body needs proof it is free. They stopped under an old stone bridge. Water spoke the low language of quiet. She let go of his hand and wanted it back so fast it embarrassed her. He studied her the way good craftsmen study a door they've repaired, making sure it swings without catching on old hurts. "What's your name?" she asked. "Rowan," he said. The sound fit right in her mouth. "And yours?" She had been read for so long she almost forgot how to answer. "Elwyn." He nodded like the world balanced a little. He didn't reach for her. He didn't step away. His hands hung open, palms forward, an old sign of truce. Rain rinsed the pit smell from her skin. Hunger shifted in her chest, changing shape. Less a knife pointed outward, more a small hearth no one had tended in years. She remembered how he stood between her and the bolts. How his hand unmade the thing that made her. Fated was still a word she did not trust. But standing with Rowan's breath fogging in the cold and her collar silent for the first time since it was buckled, she understood something simpler. She chose him. The choosing felt like ground under her feet. Behind them, the blood court would send hunters. The house would want their spectacle back. Packs would call her traitor. Covens would call Rowan blasphemy. Ahead of them, there would be places to hide, oaths to break cleanly, a way to cut the collar's magic without cutting her throat, and a truth about Rowan's hands she had only begun to see. There would be moments when her wolf begged to run, and her vampire begged to feed, and love meant learning how not to turn each other into answers for old wounds. Elwyn touched the iron at her throat. Rowan's eyes were steady on hers. "We won't make it easy," she said, plain and certain. "No," he said, "but we'll make it ours." They stood a while longer under the bridge, letting the rain decide when to stop telling its story. When they stepped out, it was together, matching pace without trying. Somewhere far behind, the pit's torches hissed down to coals. Somewhere ahead, a door she couldn't see yet was already unbolting. This is where their love story truly begins. On foot in the wet night, with a ruined blade on her back as a reminder, and an open hand at her side as a promise. Part 3. The Blood Moon Oath ***. They travelled by moonlight, following the river that cut through the forest like a scar the land hadn't yet forgiven. Elowyn's collar still hung from her throat, dull now, its glow long dead since the night Rowan touched it. She could feel it humming faintly, a ghost of its former power. Every mile between them and the pit loosened it a little more. The night air was cool, scented with moss and pine sap. When she breathed it in, it didn't hurt anymore. They didn't speak much. Words had been tools in the pit, used to command, threaten or bargain. Silence felt safer, more honest. But Rowan's quiet wasn't empty. It carried warmth, the kind that filled the space between them like a fire that didn't need tending. Sometimes, when the path grew too narrow, and the forest too dark, she caught herself walking close enough to feel his arm brush hers. Each time, she told herself it was instinct. Pack instinct. Soldier's reflex. Survival. It was easier than naming what it really was. At dawn they stopped near an abandoned watchtower. The stone was cracked, moss climbing its sides, but it offered shelter. Elwyn sat by the fire Rowan built, her back against the wall, her broken blade laid across her knees. He was kneeling nearby, cleaning the cut on his palm, the same palm that had caught her strike and shattered steel like glass. He didn't wince, even when the alcohol bit into the wound. "You should let me see that," she said, surprising herself with how gentle her voice sounded. He glanced up, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You planning to bite it closed?" Her eyes flicked to his hand. "I could." "I believe you," he said softly, "but it's already healing." That caught her attention. Healing. Faster than a human should. Her wolf senses had noticed before, but her vampire side hadn't believed it. "What are you really?" she asked. "Human," he said. "Just one that survived long enough to learn a few tricks." She tilted her head. "That's not an answer." He looked into the fire. "Then maybe you're not ready for the truth yet." For a heartbeat, her pride bristled. But then she saw it. The faint ache behind his calm, the same quiet loneliness she carried. Whatever he was hiding wasn't arrogance, it was protection. He was shielding her from something heavy. Her mother's voice rose in her memory. The ones who carry others rarely speak of their own wounds. She let it go. Instead she asked, "Why did you go into that pit?" Rowan looked up, and the firelight painted the scars on his palm gold. "Because I was looking for someone," he said, "and I found her." Her chest tightened. "You didn't even know me." "I knew enough." His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "The world called you a monster. The house called you property, but when I saw you fight, I saw someone who'd forgotten what it was like to be held without fear. I thought maybe, if I could remind you, you'd remember your name." She hadn't realized she was trembling until he said that. "Elwyn," he murmured, tasting it like a promise. "That's your true name. Not Red, not Omega, not Slave." Something cracked open inside her again, but this time it didn't hurt, it bloomed. They stayed in the tower for 3 days. Long enough for the rain to stop, long enough for her nightmares to shift. Each night, she dreamed less of the pit, and more of moonlight on a calm river. She dreamed of her parents, her mother's laugh, her father's voice, reading old poetry. And always, in those dreams, Rowan stood just out of reach, watching her, steady as stone, patient as the tide. On the 4th night, the blood court sent hunters. Elwyn smelled them first. Wet leather, silver oil, and the faint tang of fear beneath their arrogance. She rose before the first arrow flew. "Stay behind me," she told Rowan. He stood beside her instead. No. There were 6 of them. 2 vampires, 3 wolves, and 1 witch-marked enforcer from the coven. Their armor glimmered with sigils. Their leader stepped forward and spat into the dirt. "The pit property goes back to the house," he said. "The human dies slow." Elowen laughed, a low, dangerous sound. "Come take me." She moved before they could answer. Her broken blade sang again, short and fast, and the first vampire fell with a gasp. The others fanned out. The witch raised her hand and muttered an incantation. A pulse of fire shot toward Rowan, only to vanish mid-air. Rowan's palm was raised, glowing faintly with the same silver light that had once shattered her sword. "I told you," he said quietly. "It's not about fighting. It's about holding." The fire turned to harmless mist. Elowen felt power roll off him, old and patient, not the magic of covens or packs but something purer. She had seen many strengths in her life, but never this, a power that protected instead of destroyed. Together, they moved as one. She was the blade. He was the anchor. She struck, and he steadied. When one hunter fell, another turned and fled, dropping his weapon in the mud. The witch tried to curse them both, screaming words in a dead tongue. Rowan stepped forward and simply said, "No." The sound carried like thunder. The witch's sigil burned out on her own skin, leaving nothing but silence behind, and then it was over. The clearing stank of smoke and blood. Elowen stood panting, her blade dripping red against the grass. Rowan reached for her wrist, his touch gentle but firm. "Enough," he said. For a long time she didn't know if she could stop. The pit had trained her to keep fighting until nothing moved. But his voice broke through the storm in her head. "Elowen," he said again. Her name like an anchor in the dark. Her fingers loosened. The blade fell. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw what she'd been too afraid to name. Love wasn't weakness. It was remembering who you were before the world told you otherwise. She stepped closer. "You said you found me, but what if I was supposed to find you?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe fate works both ways. Do you believe in fate?" "I didn't," he said. "Until the night a woman swung a blade at me and made it sing." Her laugh broke like dawn. They left the tower before sunrise. The world was wide, green, and quiet again. Rowan guided her toward the mountains where, he said, the air was thin enough to hide them from the court's hounds. On the 3rd night, under the full blood moon, they stopped by a lake, so still it looked like glass. Elowen stood barefoot in the shallows, the moon painting her hair silver. "I've been running my whole life," she said softly, "running from what I am. Running from what they made me." "You're not running now," he said behind her. "No," she turned, "because you caught me." He stepped closer, the moonlight touching his scars. "Then let me make you a promise." She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of promise?" He took her hand and pressed it over his heart. "That I will never bind you, never own you, never cage you. The world took your freedom once. I'll spend the rest of mine making sure you keep it." Her throat ached. "And what do I give in return?" He smiled softly. "Your heart, only if you choose to." She studied him for a long moment. Then she leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "Then I choose." The bond snapped into place. Clean, deep, inevitable. Her wolf howled in joy. Her vampire heart throbbed with hunger and peace all at once. The collar at her throat cracked, split, and fell away into the sand. The moon burned brighter. They kissed. Slow, certain, unafraid. It wasn't the desperate heat of battle or the hunger of survival. It was the kiss of recognition, of 2 souls that had found the echo they'd been missing. The lake rippled. The air shimmered. Magic, the oldest kind, moved around them, binding not through chains but through choice. When they finally pulled apart, Rowan whispered, "It's done." "What is?" she breathed. "The blood moon oath," he said. "An unspoken vow between fated mates. It can't be broken, not by time, not by death." Her heart trembled. "Then we're bound," he shook his head. "No, we're free. Together." By morning, the court's hounds were still searching, but they would never find her again. The scent of her blood had changed. She was no longer the Omega of the pit, no longer the weapon they built. She was Elowen Vale again, daughter of love defied and love reborn. And beside her walked the man who had shattered her blade, and with it, her chains. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, she looked back once. Smoke curled where Crimson Hollow had stood. The pit was gone, burned to ash by the storm Rowan had called in the night before. She smiled, faint and fierce. "It's over." Rowan took her hand. "No," he said. "It's just beginning." They turned toward the horizon. The wind rose behind them, carrying the scent of rain and cedar. And as they walked into the dawn, Elowen whispered the truth she had always known, but had finally lived to see. Love doesn't wait for the world to be kind. It makes its own way, through blood, through fire, through time, forever.